Welcome to step 5 of the Ohio improvement process. You might think that you're at the end of the cycle. However, you're just beginning again. Step 5 is about looking at the practices the team put in place and did they have the intended outcomes as expected. Examine the implementation of the adult practices and look at the student performance. Reflect on the successes they had and also where did we come up short? Did we meet the needs of all students? Did all students grow as expected? Take a look at the outcomes, adjust your practices as needed, and start the process over again. Let's take a deeper look into step 5 of Ohio improvement process.
We at State Support Team 9 are here to help with the facilitation of OIP within your district. Please reach out to any of us for assistance in OIP. Together, we support districts and schools through the continuous improvement process. Just a reminder that State Support Team 9 is a part of a statewide system of supports for schools. We collaborate with our partners to ensure that each child in Ohio has access to high quality education. If you are watching this module with a team, now is a great time to stop and review the team norms in which you desire to accomplish. Please remember that these documents can be found on the Google Classroom and are also linked to the slide deck. We recommend accessing the discussion guide during this recording so you can pause and reflect with your team to document your thoughts. There is also a flexible learning option that has a variety of resources to help you go deeper. You may choose to do one or both of these to further solidify your understanding of this phase of the process. Also, check out the Ohio Department of Education's website, as well as the Ohio Leadership and Advisory Council website for more information on the Ohio improvement process, webinars, videos, and other modules to help you deepen your learning. Remember, the Ohio improvement process is about building the capacity of all districts and schools to provide each child with equitable opportunities to learn. The Ohio Strategic Plan talks about each child, our future. And the 5-step process is a part of supporting the whole child in which all students have the best means for equitable education. Click on the images to find and download each child, our future plan, as well as the infographic referring to the holistic education of the whole child. Remember, the 5-step process is a necessary component of the Ohio improvement process, involving identifying, researching, planning, implementation, and examining and reflecting on adult work. After completing this module, attendees should be able to explain step 5. You should also be able to explain how your teams, the DLT, the BLT, and TBTs examine, reflect, and adjust goals and implementation strategies. Step 5 is about having a growth mindset and learning from our failures as well as our successes. Remember, failing is just your first attempt at learning. We want to fail forward. During this step, you will review if the evidence-based practices the team put in place had the expected outcomes. You will examine the implementation of adult practices and behaviors and determine if their change in behavior had a positive impact on student performance. You will reflect on successes to replicate and practices to improve. Make sure you celebrate those successes, stick with what is working, and adjust and change what didn't work. Let's take a closer look at examine, reflect, and adjust. Where did we start? Where are we now? Where do we want to go next? When you reflect on the process, teams may ask, was the intended outcome reached? Were strategies implemented, done as designed? Was information shared amongst all team members? When you make adjustments, you identify what your next steps are. The DLT is looking at the district level to see if the strategies had the expected outcomes. They will examine adult practices and student outcomes. They will reflect on successes to replicate and the practices to improve. They will develop adjustments as needed. As a DLT, some questions to consider. When do we adjust? How long do we adjust? And are we on the right course? Remember, reflection and mid-course corrections will always be a part of the improvement process. The role of the building leadership team or the community school leadership team is looking at the building level. Do these strategies work as expected at the building level? BLTs will examine adult practices and student outcomes. They will reflect on successes to replicate and develop adjustments as needed. Questions to consider. When reviewing student data, where do we see significant improvement in the building? Can we replicate the successes throughout the building? When examining student performance, where did you see the areas of concern? Did student performance increase for all student subgroups? What support can the BLT provide to teachers? What actions or evidence-based strategies would we want to replicate throughout the building? How will we monitor the implementation of adult behavior and their actions? And does it increase student performance building-wide? The TBT is looking at the classroom level to see if the strategies had the expected outcomes. They will continue to look at their adult behavior and practices and reflect on successes to replicate and practices to improve. Sounds familiar. Each level has the same expectations. However, each level is looking through a different lens. As a TBT, what changes based on adult actions occurred for our team and students? What was their impact? If nothing changed, why do we not make any mid-course corrections? What are we going to do different as we move forward? If we saw significant impact, how will we continue the practice to ensure that the outcomes are repeated? Did all students in all subgroups make appropriate growth? Stop and reflect. How do your teams examine the implementation of your district, building, and TBT plans? How do you examine if your evidence-based strategies were successful? Teams will want to examine, evaluate, and reflect on their goals. During the planning process, teams created SMART goals. Teams will use collected evidence to determine if the goals are met, exceeded, or not met. Teams should examine and reflect on how well the student progress data or short cycle data predicted the summative data. How are your formative assessments allowing you to make mid-course corrections? Remember, short formative assessment should provide enough evidence that the summative data isn't a surprise. Teams will also have to examine the level of implementation. Thorough implementation occurs when a set of actions and strategies are implemented as designed with accuracy and consistency. Here are some questions your team should consider. Are strategies being implemented as intended? Are critical actions or tasks missing? Are all buildings consistently implementing the action steps? Are there sufficient resources to support implementation, such as human capital, finances, materials, and technical assistance? The 5-step process is about reflecting on the impact of the plan. John Hattie speaks about this in Knowing Thy Impact. Let's take a look.
What are the 3 most important things you should worry about if you're the teacher? Well, I think the first one is the adage I use, know thy impact. How do you know you're having an impact? And I'm going to cheat a little because I'm going to do more than 3, because even under that question there are 3 things. Having an understanding what impact means. Having an understanding what the magnitude, how big the impact you want. and then having an understanding whether the equity question, whether all kids get that impact. And so the first is that know thy impact. The second thing is you can't do it alone. Because if you have the answers to those questions and they differ from the teacher next door, then it's too random for the students. Every time they touch a teacher, it's going to be random whether the teacher has the same notions. And the other beauty of working with other teachers is, they're very good critics. And I mean that in a positive way. Of, look, this is what you think doing year 6 or year 10 English or algebra or history is. This is what I think it is. And having that debate so you're all on the same page and challenge each other about what your own expectations are. Because certainly we can show that teachers who have low expectations are amongst the most successful teachers in the world at getting kids to have low outcomes. And that's certainly not good enough. So that first one is about knowing thy impact. The second one is about sharing it. And I'm going to stop there because those are the two most critical things. How you go about realizing it isn't as important as we commonly want to argue in the area. There is no one magic answer. There are multiple answers to that. But that sole focus, that high focus on understanding your impact. When I walk into a classroom, my job is to understand my impact. The purpose of giving assessments in classrooms is for me to understand feedback to me as the teacher. And if you think that way, your students are the massive beneficiaries.
Stop and reflect. How do your teams determine if they meet their goals? How do your teams know thy impact? As you reflect on implementation, take a look at the questions on this slide. You may pause this and ask your team these questions. Remember, implementation should be done with fidelity. It should be done frequently. It should be done with intentionality. Right? It should have enough time for the practices to change. Frequency, intensity, and duration. Do not abandon the strategies unless you've met all three of those criteria and done with intentionality. Reflection is such an important part of the process and really in life in general. Watch a short video about John Maxwell explaining the power of reflections. We encourage that TBTs, DLTs, and BLTs reflect appropriately on the practices and the implementation of new learning.
Hi, my name is John Maxwell, and welcome to Minute with Maxwell. Henry Seeley from Trinidad, who's a teacher and a lecturer, said, John, on Minute with Maxwell today, would you talk about the word reflect? Henry, it's one of my favorite words. I've often said, reflection turns experience into insight. Now, it's commonly thought of that experience is the best teacher. I've always said it isn't. If experience were the best teacher, then everybody that got older would be getting better because they have more experience. And yet I find that there are some people that are getting older, but they're not better at all. Why aren't they better? It's not the experience that's the good teacher. It's the reflection of the experience. When we reflect on something that we've done or somebody that we've met or something that we've thought or something we've experienced, then all of a sudden we begin to learn from it. Reflection basically says, go back to what you've done and give it some thought, give it some time, meditate on it, let it marinate in your mind. And out of that reflection, pull something out that's valuable for you. I hope that you do that today. In fact, let me give you an assignment. The assignment's very simple. At the end of this day, I want you to reflect about this day. And I want you to pull out one thing in your day, the last 24 hours, that you've learned, that you've observed, that you reflect on now, that's really going to help you to be a better person. I believe that successful people spend a lot of time reflecting and thinking about what they've experienced, who they've met, and what they've done.
Stop and reflect with your team. How do successful teams reflect? How do you reflect as a team? Adjust. The last component of step 5 is to adjust. Based on your team's examination and evaluation of your plan, you will continue to modify and eliminate various practices. All too often in education, we continue ineffective practices because we tend to skip step 5 of the process. It is important not only to identify practices that are effective and to continue their use, but it is also just as important to eliminate ineffective practices. We may also have to modify a practice. This could include changes to progress monitoring tools, professional learning, resource allocation, and capital alignment. If you're implementing a strategy that is not successful, it's time to find a new strategy. If your analysis shows that implementation was not systematic across the school or district, the team must identify gaps and include in the plan action steps to ensure effective implementation. Ask yourself the question, are all successful practices being utilized across the building, across the district? If so, great. If not, what are you going to do to make the successful practices useful across the entire district? If practices are meeting or exceeding expectations, continue to use them and scale this practice across the school and district. You will need to modify or eliminate strategies when you confirm the strategy was fully implemented, yet the expected improvements did not occur. Teams should also consider eliminating strategies when the resources or efforts needed for full implementation exceeded the benefit received. Here are some additional questions to consider with your team. Have you ever looked at your practices and decided what needed to be eliminated? How long did you look at something before deciding to eliminate it? How did you communicate with stakeholders that practices have been eliminated, modified, or will be continued? What practices do you use, and what is their effect size on student learning? Stop and reflect. How do your teams decide when to continue, modify, or eliminate practices done in the classroom? Check out the Flexible Learning Options resource document to see protocols that might be useful to use in this step. How would you consider using the right conversations at each level? What protocols and norms are you using on your teams? Don't just do things because you have to. Coach for improvement. As building and teacher leaders, coaching is vital for improvement. What are you doing to help others be successful? And what feedback are you gathering as a growth-minded learner? As noted at the beginning of this module, this step is about having a growth mindset. Let's watch this video explaining Carol Dweck's growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. How are you displaying a growth mindset? How do we expect a growth mindset to be happening with our students?
Researcher and professor Carol Dweck uses the term mindset to describe the way people think about ability and talent. Dweck delineates between two different mindsets that exist on a continuum. The first is the fixed mindset, which suggests that your abilities are innate and unchangeable. The second is a growth mindset, which views it as something you can improve through practice. In a fixed mindset, you view failure as permanent, but with a growth mindset, you see failure as a chance to learn and even pivot. Those with a fixed mindset are more likely to view critical feedback as a personal attack, while those with a growth mindset will see it as a chance to improve, where they can develop new systems. With a fixed mindset, you're more likely to choose easier tasks and put in minimal effort. After all, if talent is fixed, why bother improving? Why even try? But with a growth mindset, you're more likely to embrace challenging tasks and work hard to improve. Those with a fixed mindset are likely to give up when they face an obstacle. Meanwhile, those with a growth mindset will view obstacles as a chance to experiment and solve problems. In a fixed mindset, the focus is on measurable accomplishments. But with a growth mindset, the focus is more on a journey of continual improvement. With a fixed mindset, you're less likely to take creative risks. But with a growth mindset, creative risks are simply a way to innovate and improve. Ultimately, your mindset influences everything from creative risk-taking to how you view feedback to whether or not you finish difficult tasks. And in the end, it's one of the greatest factors in determining whether or not you grow and improve in your abilities.
Take this opportunity to reflect on how your teams foster a growth mindset. In summary, step 5 has 3 things that need to be done: examine, reflect, and adjust. Examine what the adults did or didn't do. Reflect on what went well and what didn't. What do we need to keep doing? What do we need to modify? What do we need to eliminate? And then adjust as needed. During this module, we focused on step 5 of the process. Be sure to complete the other modules to have a full and deep understanding of all aspects of the Ohio improvement process. We thank you for the opportunity to share the Ohio improvement process with you. As always, please contact any of the State Support Team 9 consultants listed on this slide for any questions about the Ohio improvement process.